Hollywood in 1977 was everything you'd imagine it to be. The city of dreams, where young hopefuls arrived every day with nothing but a suitcase and ambition. Among them was a woman named Elena Hartwell, but unlike most dreamers, she was actually making it happen. At 28 years old, Elena had spent the last 6 years grinding through auditions, taking small roles and working as a waitress between gigs. She'd done commercials for toothpaste and laundry detergent. She'd played Woman at Bus Stop and Nurse Number 3 in forgettable TV episodes. But Elena had something special. Everyone who met her said so. There was a quality about her that the camera loved, a mix of classic beauty and raw emotion that couldn't be taught. By the fall of 1978, everything was finally coming together. Elena had landed the role of a lifetime in a major studio film called Desert Rose. It wasn't just another supporting part. This was a leading role, the kind that could change everything. The studio was investing millions, and they believed Elena could carry the entire picture. Her face was supposed to be on billboards across America by summer. She'd moved into a small but charming house in the Hollywood Hills. Nothing fancy, but it had a view of the city lights at night, and for a girl from a small town in Ohio, it felt like she'd reached the top of the world. Her mother called every Sunday, bursting with pride, already planning her trip to Los Angeles for the film's premiere. But something was off in those final weeks. People who knew Elena well started noticing changes. She seemed distracted during rehearsals. Her usual bright energy had dimmed. She'd look over her shoulder when walking to her car. At a dinner party in late October, her friend Catherine pulled her aside and asked if everything was okay. Elena had smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she'd said. "This business takes everything out of you." The truth was more complicated. Earlier that year, Elena had been in a relationship with a film producer named Vincent Castellano. Vincent was 20 years older, powerful in the industry and used to getting what he wanted. When they'd first met at a party, he'd swept her off her feet with his confidence and connections. He'd promised her the world, and for a few months Elena had believed him. But Vincent had a dark side. He was controlling, jealous, and had a temper that frightened her. When Elena tried to end things in August, he hadn't taken it well. There were late-night phone calls where he'd plead with her, then turn angry and threatening. He'd shown up at her house unannounced. Once, she'd found him sitting in his car outside her favorite coffee shop, just watching. Elena had confided in her agent, a sharp businesswoman named Gloria Winters, about the situation. Gloria had been in the industry for 20 years and had seen it all. She told Elena not to worry, that men like Vincent were all talk, that he'd move on to the next young actress soon enough. "Just focus on the film," Gloria had advised. "Success is the best revenge." But the feeling of being watched never went away. Elena mentioned to several friends that she thought someone was following her. Not Vincent himself, but someone else. A man in a dark jacket she kept seeing at different places around town. At the grocery store, near the studio. Once she was certain she'd seen him parked down the street from her house. Her co-star in Desert Rose was an actor named Thomas Reed, a genuinely kind person who'd already had success in smaller films. Thomas had noticed Elena's anxiety during filming. They'd developed a close friendship, and he'd asked her several times if she needed help with anything. Elena always brushed it off, but Thomas could tell something serious was bothering her. The film's director, Alan Rothstein, was also concerned. Elena had always been professional, never missing a day or flubbing her lines. But in early November, her concentration seemed to waver. In one scene, she'd suddenly stopped mid-take and asked if they could lock the studio doors. Everyone had laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. On November 11, 1978, Elena had lunch with Catherine at a small Italian restaurant near the studio. It was one of their regular spots, quiet enough to actually talk. Elena seemed different that day, more serious than usual. She told Catherine that she'd been keeping a detailed diary, writing down everything that had been happening. "If anything ever happens to me," Elena had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "make sure someone reads it." Catherine had felt a chill run down her spine. "Elena, you're scaring me. What's going on?" But Elena had just shaken her head and changed the subject, asking about Catherine's upcoming audition instead. When they parted ways that afternoon, Elena had hugged her friend tighter and longer than usual. Catherine would replay that moment in her mind thousands of times in the years to come. The next day, November 12th, started like any other. Elena arrived at the studio for costume fittings. She seemed lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted. She joked with the costume designer and even hummed a tune while getting her measurements adjusted. At lunch, she called her mother in Ohio and chatted about Thanksgiving plans. Everything seemed normal. Around 4 in the afternoon, Elena received a phone call. The receptionist who transferred it remembered that Elena's expression had changed when she heard who was calling. She'd taken the call in a private office. When she emerged 15 minutes later, she told Alan that she had to leave early, that something important had come up. An old friend is in town, she'd explained, grabbing her purse and her signature emerald necklace from her dressing room. Someone who can help me sort everything out. I'll be back tomorrow, I promise. Those would be the last words anyone at the studio would hear from Elena Hartwell. She left the studio at 4:47 p.m., according to the security log. She was driving her cream-colored Volkswagen Beetle, the car she'd bought when she first arrived in Los Angeles and refused to trade in even after she could afford something fancier. She said it was her good luck charm. Elena was supposed to meet her agent Gloria the next morning to discuss contract details for her next film. The studio had already lined up another project for her. She was supposed to have dinner with Thomas and some other cast members that weekend. She had a dentist appointment on Tuesday and a costume fitting on Thursday, but Elena Hartwell never made it to any of those appointments. She drove away from the studio that November afternoon and vanished into the Los Angeles traffic, never to be seen alive again. When Elena didn't show up for her morning meeting with Gloria on November 13th, her agent wasn't immediately worried. Actors sometimes overslept or forgot appointments. Gloria left a message with Elena's answering service and went about her day. But when Elena missed the afternoon rehearsal without calling, people started to get concerned. Thomas tried calling her house multiple times. No answer. The studio sent someone to her home in the Hollywood Hills. Her cream-colored Beetle wasn't in the driveway. The lights were off. Everything looked normal from the outside, but something felt wrong. By evening, Catherine was frantic. She called Elena's mother in Ohio, hoping Elena had made a spontaneous trip home. She hadn't. On November 15th, 3 days after anyone had seen her, a hiker made a disturbing discovery. Elena's Volkswagen was found parked at a scenic overlook in Laurel Canyon, a winding mountain road known for its breathtaking views of the city. The car was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was gone, but her sunglasses were on the passenger seat. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no broken windows, just an abandoned car at the edge of a cliff, as if Elena had simply stepped out to admire the view and never came back. The Los Angeles Police Department assigned Detective Robert Morrison to the case. Morrison was in his early 40s, a veteran investigator who'd seen more than his share of missing persons cases in Hollywood. Most of them ended badly, but he approached each one hoping this time would be different. The first thing Morrison did was search Elena's house. What he found painted a picture of someone who'd left in a hurry but planned to return. Her bed was made. Dishes were clean in the drying rack. Her toothbrush was still in the bathroom. Clothes hung neatly in her closet. But there were some odd details that bothered Morrison. Elena's address book was missing. So was her diary, the one Catherine insisted she carried everywhere. Morrison interviewed everyone who knew Elena. Her mother flew in from Ohio, devastated and confused. She insisted her daughter would never just disappear without telling anyone. They'd talked the day she vanished, and Elena had sounded fine, maybe even happy. There was no indication she was planning to run away. The investigation revealed something interesting about Elena's bank account. On the morning of November 12th, before she went to the studio, Elena had withdrawn $10,000 in cash. The bank teller remembered her because it was an unusually large amount. Elena had seemed nervous, kept looking at the door while waiting for the money to be counted. When asked what the withdrawal was for, she'd said only insurance. This detail changed everything. People don't withdraw that kind of money unless they're planning something. Was Elena paying someone off? Was she being blackmailed? Or was she preparing to disappear on her own terms? Morrison turned his attention to Vincent Castellano, the producer Elena had dated. Vincent had money, power, and a reputation for having a temper. Several people mentioned that he hadn't taken the breakup well. But when Morrison questioned him, Vincent had an ironclad alibi. On November 12th, he'd been at a major studio party celebrating a film premiere. Dozens of people could confirm he'd been there from 6 in the evening until well past midnight. Security footage from the venue backed up his story. "Look, Detective," Vincent had said during the interview, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. "Elena and I had our problems, sure, but I would never hurt her. I cared about her. I still do. I hope you find her safe." Morrison didn't entirely trust Vincent, but he couldn't ignore the evidence. The man simply couldn't have been in two places at once. Next, Morrison looked closely at Thomas Reed, Elena's co-star. Several crew members mentioned that Thomas seemed to have feelings for Elena beyond friendship. He'd been protective of her on set, always making sure she was comfortable. Some people thought maybe he was jealous of her past relationship with Vincent. When Morrison brought Thomas in for questioning, the actor was cooperative but clearly emotional. "I cared about her, yes," Thomas admitted, his voice cracking. "But as a friend. She was going through something difficult and I wanted to help. That's all." Thomas's alibi checked out too. He'd been in New York the entire week of November 12th, filming a guest spot on a television show. Flight records, hotel receipts, and production schedules all confirmed his story. He'd flown back to Los Angeles on November 14th, the day after Elena was reported missing. Gloria Winters, Elena's agent, was the last person known to have spoken with Elena by phone. Morrison questioned her extensively. Gloria said their conversation had been routine, just confirming their meeting for the next morning to discuss contract details. She claimed Elena had seemed distracted but not upset. "Did she mention meeting anyone that evening?" Morrison asked. Gloria had thought for a moment before answering. "She said something about meeting an old friend. I didn't think anything of it at the time." "Elena knew a lot of people," Morrison pressed her. "Did she say who this friend was?" "No, Detective. And I didn't ask. I wish now that I had." The investigation hit a frustrating wall. Morrison had suspects but no solid evidence. He had strange circumstances but no crime scene. Days turned into weeks. The police searched Laurel Canyon thoroughly, worried that Elena might have fallen or jumped from the overlook. Search and rescue teams combed the area. They found nothing. The media had a field day with the story. "Rising star vanishes without a trace," screamed the headlines. Television news ran segments speculating about what might have happened. Some reporters suggested Elena had staged her own disappearance to escape the pressures of fame. Others whispered about organized crime connections, pointing to her father's past gambling problems. The tabloids were even worse, inventing wild theories with no basis in fact. They claimed Elena had been abducted by a cult, that she'd run off with a secret lover, that she'd been involved in something illegal and had to flee. Her face was everywhere, but the real Elena seemed to have vanished into thin air. Morrison worked the case obsessively for 6 months. He followed every lead, no matter how small. He interviewed over 100 people. He reviewed hours of security footage from around the city, hoping to spot Elena's car or catch a glimpse of her. But it was like she'd simply ceased to exist after driving away from that studio. The case eventually went cold. Not officially closed, but with no new leads, there was nowhere else to go. The studio shelved Desert Rose, unable to complete the film without its leading actress. Elena's contract was quietly terminated. Her house was eventually sold, her belongings packed up and sent to her mother. Morrison kept a box of files in his garage, everything related to the Elena Hartwell case. He'd pull it out sometimes late at night, going through witness statements and evidence reports looking for something he might have missed. The case haunted him. Somewhere out there were answers. He just couldn't find them. Years would pass. Hollywood would move on to new stories, new scandals, new mysteries. But Detective Robert Morrison never forgot the young actress who'd driven away one November afternoon and disappeared forever. At least not until 22 years later, when a construction crew would make a discovery that would finally bring the truth to light. 22 years is a long time. Long enough for the world to change completely. Long enough for memories to fade and people to forget. By the year 2000, the story of Elena Hartwell had become just another unsolved Hollywood mystery. The kind true crime enthusiasts would discuss, in online forums or documentaries, would feature for 15 minutes before moving on to the next case. Detective Robert Morrison had retired from the LAPD in 1995. He was 63 now, living in a quiet neighborhood in Pasadena with his wife Helen. Their kids were grown with families of their own. Morrison spent his days tending his garden, reading mystery novels and trying not to think too much about the cases he'd never solved. But Elena's case was different. It stayed with him in a way the others didn't. He still had that box of files in his garage tucked behind old paint cans and Christmas decorations. Sometimes, when he couldn't sleep, he'd go out there at 2 a.m. and flip through the yellowing papers, the witness statements, the crime scene photos of the abandoned car, the bank withdrawal records. He'd stare at Elena's headshot, the one the studio had taken for publicity, and wonder what had really happened to her. Helen would find him out there occasionally, sitting on an old folding chair surrounded by paperwork. She never told him to let it go. She understood that some cases burrow into a detective's soul and never leave. The world Elena had known was almost unrecognizable now. The Hollywood Hills had exploded with development. Mansions sprouted up where there had once been empty hillsides. Old studios had been renovated or torn down. The internet had changed everything about how people lived and communicated. Cell phones were everywhere now. Things that had been impossible in 1978 were ordinary in 2000. Elena's mother had passed away in 1991, her heart broken by never knowing what happened to her daughter. She'd spent 13 years hoping for a phone call, a letter, any sign that Elena was alive somewhere. The hope had consumed her. At her funeral, Morrison had stood in the back of the church, feeling like he'd failed this woman who'd trusted him to find her child. Elena's father was still alive, but barely present. He lived in a nursing home in Ohio, his mind slowly disappearing to dementia. On his good days, he'd asked the nurses if anyone had called with news about Elena. On his bad days, he thought it was still 1978, and Elena was just running late coming home. Thomas Reed had gone on to have a successful career in Hollywood. He'd starred in several well-received films through the 80s and 90s, eventually transitioning to directing. He was married now with 3 teenagers, but in interviews when reporters asked about his early career, he'd always mention Elena. She should have been a huge star, he'd say, his voice getting quiet. She had something special. What happened to her was a tragedy. Catherine, Elena's close friend, had left the entertainment industry entirely. She'd moved to Oregon, became a teacher, and tried to build a normal life far away from Hollywood. But she kept a framed photo of Elena on her bookshelf, taken at that last lunch they'd shared. Sometimes she'd look at it and remember Elena's words. "If anything ever happens to me, make sure someone reads it." Catherine had told the police about the diary, but it had never been found. That guilt never left her. Gloria Winters had retired wealthy and successful. She'd represented dozens of major stars over the years, building an empire in the entertainment industry. She lived in a beautiful house in Malibu with an ocean view and every luxury imaginable. At 75, she was still sharp, still connected, still hosting parties that the biggest names in Hollywood attended. If she ever thought about Elena Hartwell, she never showed it. Vincent Castellano had become one of the most powerful producers in the business. His films had won Oscars. His name opened doors everywhere. He'd been married twice, divorced twice, and was currently dating an actress 40 years younger than him. Some things never change in Hollywood. He claimed he rarely thought about Elena anymore, though people who knew him well said he got quiet whenever her name came up. The case itself had taken on a life of its own in popular culture. True crime books devoted chapters to Elena's disappearance. Amateur detectives on early internet forums debated theories endlessly. Some believed she'd been murdered by someone in the industry. Others thought she'd run away to start a new life, maybe in Mexico or Europe. A few conspiracy theorists claimed she'd witnessed something she shouldn't have and been silenced. Every few years, someone would claim to have seen Elena alive. A woman matching her description in a small town in Arizona, an older lady working in a bookstore in Seattle who had the same distinctive eyes, a tourist in Paris who looked remarkably similar. Morrison had followed up on dozens of these leads in the first few years. None of them panned out. Elena Hartwell had simply vanished. The case file at the LAPD remained officially open, but realistically everyone had moved on. New detectives worked new cases. The chances of solving a 22-year-old disappearance with no new evidence were essentially zero. Cold cases occasionally got solved, but usually because of advances in DNA technology or someone coming forward with new information. Neither had happened with Elena. Morrison sometimes drove by the overlook where Elena's car had been found. The city had put up a better guardrail since then. The view was still stunning, the lights of Los Angeles stretching out to the horizon. He'd stand there and try to imagine what Elena had been thinking that day. Had she met someone there? Had she been forced there? Had she gone willingly? The cliff told him nothing. The Hollywood Hills kept growing. Construction crews worked constantly, carving new properties out of the landscape, building bigger and more expensive homes for the latest generation of wealthy residents. Bulldozers and excavators reshaped the terrain, erasing the past to make room for the future. In the spring of 2000, one particular construction project was underway on a piece of land that had been undeveloped for decades. The property had changed hands several times over the years, bought and sold by investors and developers waiting for the right moment to build. That moment had finally arrived. Plans called for a luxury home with a pool, guest house, and panoramic views. The construction crew showed up on a Monday morning in early May. It was supposed to be a routine job. Clear the land, lay the foundation, start building. The crew foreman, a man named Miguel Santos, had been in construction for 30 years. He'd worked on hundreds of projects across Los Angeles. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. Miguel operated the excavator himself that first day, digging into the hillside to level the ground. The machine's massive bucket scooped up tons of earth and rock, dumping it into waiting trucks. It was hot work even in the morning. Miguel was thinking about lunch, about getting home to see his daughter's soccer game that evening, about anything except the dirt he was moving. Then, around 11:30 in the morning, he saw something that made him stop the machine cold. There in the fresh soil was a flash of green that definitely didn't belong. It caught the sunlight, glinting like a jewel. Miguel climbed down from the excavator cab and walked over to investigate, his boots crunching on the loose dirt. What he found would finally answer a question that had haunted people for more than 2 decades. Miguel bent down and carefully brushed away the dirt with his gloved hand. The green object was partially buried, but as he cleared more soil, he realized it was a necklace. An emerald necklace, tarnished and dirty but still intact. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just any piece of jewelry left behind by accident. Something about finding it here buried this deep felt very wrong. He called out to his crew to stop work immediately. Then he dug a little more carefully around the area with his hands. That's when he saw the corner of something metal, a box. It was badly corroded, eaten away by 22 years in the ground, but it was still in one piece. Miguel didn't open it. He'd watched enough crime shows to know better than to contaminate potential evidence. The crew foreman made the call to 911 at 11:47 a.m. Within 40 minutes, the construction site was swarming with police officers. The LAPD's cold case unit was notified immediately. This kind of discovery, jewelry buried with a metal box in an undeveloped area, almost always meant one thing. Someone had hidden something they never wanted found. Detective Lisa Chen caught the case. She was 36, sharp, and had made her reputation by solving several cold cases using new forensic techniques. When she arrived at the site and saw the emerald necklace, something clicked in her memory. She'd studied old unsolved cases when she joined the cold case unit, and this necklace looked familiar. The metal box was carefully excavated and opened at the scene. Inside, protected by layers of plastic wrapping, was a woman's purse. The leather was deteriorated, but the contents were preserved. A wallet with credit cards, some makeup, and a driver's license with a photo of a beautiful young woman with dark hair and striking eyes. The name on the license read, Elena Hartwell. Chen felt her pulse quicken. She knew this case. Everyone in the department knew this case. It was legendary, one of those mysteries that detectives still talked about during training. And now, after 22 years, they might finally have answers. But there was something else in the box. A leather-bound diary, wrapped separately in multiple layers of plastic. Someone had taken great care to preserve it. The pages were still readable, filled with Elena's handwriting. Chen knew this was crucial evidence. She ordered the entire area secured and called for forensic teams to do a complete excavation. By late afternoon, they'd found what everyone feared they would find. 6 feet below the surface, wrapped in old canvas material, were human remains. The forensic team worked carefully, documenting everything. The bones had been there for a very long time. Dental records would need to confirm the identity, but in Chen's gut she already knew. Elena Hartwell had been found. The news broke that evening and exploded across every media outlet. Missing actress found after 22 years dominated the headlines. The story that had captivated Hollywood in 1978 was suddenly front-page news again. Reporters descended on the construction site. News helicopters circled overhead. The mystery everyone thought would never be solved was finally cracking open. Detective Morrison got the call at home during dinner. When his former partner told him what they'd found, Morrison had to sit down. For 22 years, he'd wondered. For 22 years, he'd hoped somehow Elena was alive somewhere, living under a new name, happy and safe. But deep down, he'd always known. The evidence had pointed to something terrible from the beginning. He drove to the police station that night and asked Chen if he could see the case files. She knew who he was, knew this case had haunted him for decades. She led him into the conference room where everything was laid out. The necklace Elena had been wearing that last day, her purse with her identification, and the diary. Morrison's hands shook as he carefully turned the pages, reading Elena's words from beyond the grave. The diary entries started weeks before her disappearance. She'd written about feeling watched, about the man in the dark jacket following her. She'd documented phone calls and strange encounters. And then, in the final entries, she'd written something that changed everything. Elena had discovered something. Something big. Her agent Gloria had been running a blackmail operation, targeting wealthy and powerful people in Hollywood. Gloria had been secretly gathering compromising information and photographs, then extorting money from her victims for years. It was sophisticated and careful. Gloria would befriend clients, gain their trust, learn their secrets, and then bleed them dry. Elena had stumbled onto this operation by accident. She'd gone to Gloria's office unexpectedly one afternoon and overheard a phone conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Then she'd started noticing things. Files that disappeared, meetings Gloria wouldn't explain, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when Elena walked into the room. The diary detailed how Elena had confronted Gloria about it 2 weeks before she disappeared. Gloria had denied everything at first, then broke down and admitted to it, begging Elena not to tell anyone. She'd promised it was over, that she was getting out of that business. Elena had wanted to believe her. Gloria had been her agent for 3 years, had helped her career, had been like a mentor. But Elena couldn't let it go. The diary revealed that she'd decided to go to the police. She'd been gathering evidence, writing down everything she knew. The $10,000 she'd withdrawn from the bank wasn't for herself. It was money Gloria had given her, trying to buy her silence. Elena had taken it but planned to turn it over to the authorities as evidence. The final entry in the diary was dated November 12, 1978, the day Elena disappeared. She'd written it that morning before going to the studio. The words were hurried, almost frantic. Gloria called this morning. She says she has someone I need to meet, someone who can help me go to the police safely. She gave me an address in the hills. I'm scared, but I have to do this. If you're reading this diary, then something went wrong. Gloria knows everything. She set this meeting up. I should have known better than to trust her one more time. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she really is trying to help. I guess I'll find out tonight. Those were Elena's last written words. She'd gone to that meeting in the Hollywood Hills, and she'd never come back. Chen immediately ordered a team to Gloria Winter's house in Malibu. But Gloria wasn't stupid. She'd seen the news coverage. By the time officers arrived at her Ocean View mansion at 10 p.m., Gloria was in her study, calmly sipping wine and waiting for them. She'd known this day might come eventually. The forensic evidence would take weeks to fully process, but the diary alone was damning. The property where Elena had been buried had been owned by Gloria Winters in 1978. She'd purchased it in 1976 and sold it to a development company in 1985. She'd literally buried Elena on her own land, then sold it 7 years later, confident the secret would stay hidden forever. But secrets have a way of coming out. Construction crews dig up the past. Diaries survive when they're meant to disappear. And sometimes after 22 long years, the truth finally gets its chance to speak. Gloria Winters sat in the interrogation room with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing the game is over. She was 75 years old, wearing an expensive silk blouse and pearls, looking more like she was attending a charity luncheon than facing a murder investigation. Her lawyer, a sharp man in a tailored suit, sat beside her, advising her to say nothing. But Gloria had been holding this secret for 22 years. Maybe part of her was relieved it was finally coming out. Detective Chen laid the diary on the table between them. "We found Elena's diary, Gloria. She wrote everything down. The blackmail operation, the confrontation you two had, the meeting you set up for her that last day." Gloria stared at the diary for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she did something that surprised everyone. She told her lawyer to leave the room. He protested, but Gloria insisted. "I'm 75 years old," she said quietly. "I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left pretending." What Gloria confessed that night filled in the missing pieces of a puzzle that had been incomplete for over 2 decades. Yes, she'd been running a blackmail scheme. It had started small in the early 70s, just gathering information she could use as leverage when negotiating contracts for her clients. But it had grown into something darker. She'd been making more money from blackmail than from her legitimate business. Elena had figured it out, just like the diary said. And Elena, with her small-town values and honest heart, couldn't let it go. Gloria had tried everything to keep her quiet. She'd offered money, which Elena had taken but planned to turn over as evidence. She'd made threats, which only made Elena more determined. Finally, Gloria realized Elena was actually going to the police, and that meant Gloria's entire life would come crashing down. "I panicked," Gloria said, her voice steady but tired. "I'd built everything from nothing. My career, my reputation, my wealth, and this girl, this sweet, naive girl from Ohio, was going to destroy it all because she couldn't look the other way." But Gloria hadn't acted alone. She'd called in a favor from someone who owed her, a struggling actor named David Chen who'd done odd jobs for her over the years. David was desperate for money, drowning in debt, willing to do almost anything for the right price. Gloria had paid him $50,000 to help her solve her Elena problem. The meeting Gloria had set up that November evening was a trap. She told Elena that someone wanted to help her go to the authorities safely, someone who could protect her from retaliation. Elena had driven to the remote property in the Hollywood Hills, probably nervous but hopeful. David had been waiting there. Gloria didn't go into the specific details of what happened next, and the investigators didn't push her. The remains told enough of that story. What mattered was that Elena had died that night, and Gloria and David had buried her 6 feet deep on property Gloria owned, in an area where no one would think to look. Gloria had kept Elena's necklace, purse, and diary. She'd meant to destroy them, but something had stopped her. Maybe guilt. Maybe insurance in case David ever tried to blackmail her. She'd sealed them in a metal box and buried it with Elena. Then she'd gone on with her life, representing other actresses, attending premieres, building her empire on top of a terrible secret. David Chen had taken his $50,000 and disappeared. He'd left Los Angeles within a week and had been living in Mexico under a false name for over 2 decades. When the investigators tracked him down, they found him in a small hospital in Tijuana. He was 62 years old and dying of cancer. At first, David denied everything. But when they told him about Gloria's confession, something broke inside him. He'd been carrying this weight for 22 years. The guilt had eaten at him, destroyed his life, turned him into a shell of a person hiding in a foreign country. With only weeks to live, he finally told the truth about that November night. He confirmed Gloria's story and added details that made the picture complete. He described how they'd planned it, how he'd met Elena at the property, how everything had gone wrong. He'd thought he could live with what he'd done for $50,000. He'd been wrong. The money had run out years ago, but the nightmares never stopped. The trial began 8 months later. Gloria had initially pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. The diary, David's deathbed confession, forensic evidence linking the burial site to Gloria's old property, financial records showing large cash withdrawals around the time of Elena's disappearance, phone records from 1978 that investigators had miraculously recovered from archived storage. The prosecution painted a picture of a ruthless woman who'd built her success on manipulation and intimidation, who'd murdered a young actress to protect her criminal enterprise. The defense tried to argue that Gloria had acted in a moment of panic, that she'd never intended for anyone to get hurt. But it was impossible to defend the indefensible. The courtroom was packed every day. Thomas Reed attended, looking older now but still carrying that sadness in his eyes when he looked at Elena's photo. Catherine flew in from Oregon, clutching tissues and crying silently as she heard the details of her friend's final days. Vincent Castellano sent a statement expressing his shock but didn't attend in person. Detective Morrison sat in the back row every single day of the trial. He was 65 now, his hair completely white, but his eyes were sharp as ever. He'd waited 22 years for this moment. When the guilty verdict came back on all counts, he allowed himself one quiet moment of satisfaction. It didn't bring Elena back. It didn't undo the pain her family had suffered. But at least there were finally answers. Gloria Winters was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 76, everyone knew she'd die behind bars. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at the courtroom one last time. Her face showed no emotion. The woman who'd once commanded respect in Hollywood would spend her remaining days in a cell, her legacy forever destroyed. Elena's father died 2 months after the trial concluded. The nursing home staff said that on his final day, during one of his rare moments of clarity, he'd smiled and said, "They found her. My Elena. They finally found her." Whether he truly understood or was lost in memory, no one knew. But he died at peace, and that was something. Elena Hartwell was laid to rest beside her mother in a quiet cemetery in Ohio. The service was small, attended by the people who'd loved her and never forgotten. Thomas gave a eulogy, his voice breaking as he talked about the brilliant actress Elena should have become, the life she should have lived. Catherine placed a single white rose on the casket and whispered an apology for not protecting her friend better. Morrison stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, finally saying goodbye to the case that had defined so much of his career. The story made headlines around the world. Documentary crews requested interviews. True crime podcasters devoted entire series to the case. Elena's unfinished film, Desert Rose, was recovered from the studio archives. They held a special screening in her memory, showing the footage that existed, a bittersweet glimpse of the star she would have been. Hollywood has a short memory, but some stories don't fade. Elena Hartwell's name became synonymous with dreams cut short, with the darkness that can hide behind the glamour. Her story served as a reminder that behind every missing person is a real human being, with hopes and family, and a future that was stolen from them. 22 years she'd been buried in those hills. Her voice silenced, her story untold. But in the end, the truth came out. It always does, one way or another. All it took was one construction crew, one flash of green in the dirt, and one diary that survived when it was meant to disappear forever. Elena's story was finally complete. Not the ending anyone wanted, but at least it was an ending. And sometimes after waiting long enough in the darkness, even painful truth feels like light.